Our next speaker, Akram Azimi, considers himself to be one of the luckiest people on the planet. Indeed, he likens himself to Charlie from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. However, unlike Charlie, he's done a bit better. He's won all 5 golden tickets. His first golden ticket was being born to a university-educated mother in Afghanistan. The second was when he received his lottery ticket-like visa to come and live in Australia. The third was finding his inspiring teachers at Warwick Senior High School. The fourth was gaining a full scholarship to St George's College, where he was then able to study law, science and arts at the University of Western Australia. And the fifth was being picked as Young Australian of the Year, despite, as Akram views it, there being far more worthy nominees. You can all envisage, however, that winning Australian of the Year is a little bit more than winning a ticket. Akram has used his pastoral and leadership skills to mentor young people in rural and remote Western Australia. He co-founded I Am the Other to raise awareness of Indigenous issues in university and has worked with True Blue Dreaming to help disadvantaged Indigenous communities. He is an absolute poster boy for what an inclusive, multicultural Australia can be. He is truly a master of embracing life, living in the moment, and he is so modest of his incredible achievements. Here to talk shit with us today, please welcome Akram Azimi and Scotch College student Nathan Schaff.
Thanks, mate. That kind of introduction is one that would make your dad proud, and only your mum would believe it. Thanks, mate. I can't take credit for any of that. Good morning, guys. You should have a template letter floating around. We're going to do something a little bit unusual. We're going to start in the end. Are those letters being spread around? So everybody's got one? Awesome. What I want you to do, if you don't have one, that's okay. You can just use any old piece of paper. That still works really well. And what we're going to do, as we're talking about this issue, I would love for you to jot down some key ideas for you, and at the end, put that in a paragraph, and what we're going to do is we're going to send this to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Honourable Julie Bishop. She is a strong supporter of this issue. However, she needs political capital. She needs support from the community. She needs support from people who know about this issue. And what I'm hoping, and what we're hoping, is that this will not just be a speech. This will also be an opportunity for action. And that's where you guys come in. So when we do meet Minister Bishop, we can say it's not just Nathan and I who think this issue is really, really important. We have all these people behind us. People like yourselves, young med students, who care just as much about this issue for these reasons. Everybody okay with that? Awesome. No compulsion. If you'd like to write that letter at the end, I'd be very, very happy and honored to collect it. I want to thank the organizers of this conference. I'm not sure if you guys know how much work they've actually put behind the scenes, how many hours they've put into this. They had to deal with someone like myself, and I was a total diva, right? My rates were ridiculous, right? I insisted a limo to getting here. They had to put up with a lot, all the while studying medicine. So I think this model of leadership, where you serve your community and you do make sacrifices for the betterment of others, that deserves our respect and a big round of applause. Before we begin with substantive matters, I would like to start with acknowledgement and gratitude for the traditional custodians of this living land upon which we gather, the Whadjuk Noongar people. I pay my respects not out of protocol, but out of the self-evident truth that their culture surrounds us, informs us, and indeed is an integral part of what it means to be Australian. For this grand reason, and many more personal, smaller reasons, I pay my respects to the elders both past what brings me this particular moment, essentially more or less talking shit. Culture, medicine, and open defecation is because of the 3 hats I've been privileged enough to wear for the last couple of years. The first of those hats is as a sociologist. The second of those hats is somebody who works at the grassroots level in the community. And the third of those is as a teacher. I've just started teaching medicine, and I've been teaching students like Nathan for the last year as well. And I would love to introduce this special young man to you and give you some context of why we would like to have this conversation with you.
Good morning. As said before, I'm Nathan Schaff. I'm a Year 10 student, as where you probably guessed, Scotch College, just down in Swanbourne. For many years, up until recently, after flushing, I've never thought twice about poo. At our school, we have a service learning program. Normally, it involves going out into the community and doing some good, and as a result of this service, we learn. But instead of just focusing on this service, Akram introduced a brand new idea. We learn in order to serve. We produce empirically grounded, ethically justifiable knowledge and disseminate it into the wider community. And this is a broader theme that will come back again and again. So many social issues seem unsolvable because they've been misdiagnosed. Sanitation, and particularly open defecation, is one such misdiagnosed public issue. My dad, up there with the giant camera, is an engineer, and he travels the world. And looking back, because I was obviously traveling with him, sanitation has never been an issue for me. I expected a toilet to be present, and then magically, it was. And of course, I was very small, and I didn't think twice about it, but I couldn't imagine a life without toilets. It was part of my enculturated process. Pierre Bourdieu calls it embodied knowledge. It is not really knowledge that I can readily declare, it's knowledge that is part of me, part of my enculturated body. Only now, after having read about the lack of sanitation in some of these developing countries, that I realized that I had to do something about it. But at first, I thought the issue was plainly obvious for how to stop open defecation. It was just build more toilets. Let me first define the impact of the problem before Akram comes back again and defines what the problem is. Diarrhea is the second largest cause of under 5 child mortality across the globe. And with figures from the last few years, 2 to 2.5 billion people still do not have access to proper sanitation. And 1 billion people every day open defecate. Lack of proper sanitation kills 1,400 children each day, which is roughly 1 child per minute. Clearly, this is a very big problem, as 10% of all deaths in India are from this issue. In South Sudan, 77% of the population practices open defecation. And in Madagascar, open defecation is the second leading cause of child mortality, not under 5 child mortality, but all. There's also a significant economic cost here. According to UNICEF, developing countries lose about 260 billion US dollars annually due to the inadequate sanitation systems. Spears, 2013, also found that the difference between growth rates were as much as 35 to 55% between districts that have proper sanitation and ones that don't in India. So clearly, this is a very large problem.
Part of the issue, as Nathan so eloquently put it, is the misdiagnosis of the problem. We thought that if you just put a toilet in there, you put some infrastructure in there, people would go and do their business in it. That's what we thought. We presumed that people from other cultures were very similar to us. But as Nathan said, this kind of knowledge is built into our body. It is something that is cultivated in us over many, many years. And it's the kind of knowledge that we think with. So it's very hard to think about it. And we presume that this is human nature, We absorb our culture, and we have thought it human nature. Thus, we thought we could end open defecation by just producing the infrastructure. Now, this is the danger of a misdiagnosis. At best, it does nothing. At worst, it actually creates new problems. And in certain parts of India, in certain parts of developing countries, these subsidies for open defecation measures to create new toilets has actually created whole new industries that have one purpose: build toilets at a subsidy level. Even though now we know that's not the factor that really makes a difference. Now these industries are so powerful that they lobby on their own behalf. So we've more or less created a problem because of our misdiagnosis of the issue. This problem in certain parts is so bad. For example, in South Africa, there's about 14,000 toilets currently being unused. They were just plopped there, and the assumption was that human beings would just go in there and do their business. Toilets just sit there. That money is more or less being flushed down the toilet as we speak. And if you go to Madagascar, especially a few years ago, you'd have seen a really interesting sight. You'd have seen a whole bunch of these little toilet blocks. But when you open them, you would notice that people had put their clothing and their furniture and their things in there. It was being used as a storage area. Clearly there's something deeper going on here. Clearly hygiene is more than just a bodily issue, more than just an infrastructure issue. It is a cultural issue. It is an issue of intercorporeality. That is to say, the relationship between bodies. It is about intersubjectivity. That is to say, the space between you and I. It is about the relationship between bodies, not just something within a body. And when you think about this and you go a little bit deeper, you realize hygiene plays a much larger cultural role. It is about the division between the impure and the pure, the clean and the unclean. And some of you may have read the very famous anthropologist, Mary Douglas, where she articulates so well that human beings have this need to create order, to keep the dirty here and the clean here, and the profound discomfort they feel when the two overlap. You have to take into account the intersubjectivity of this issue. It is not enough to be able to diagnose the consequences of open defecation within one body. I think it's time we expanded the health professional's diagnostic kit to also take into account the relationships that this person's in. Let me give you the example of Rhinelander from 2015. This is in northern Vietnam, rural villages, and what they found there is that the conception of the human body by the locals was the body as a very porous thing, and it was subject to airborne things. So air and the body had a really interesting relationship in the way that we don't think about. And so they would practice open defecation because within their cosmology of clean and dirty, it was the dirty air, it was the smell that you had to keep away from. Can you see how latrines now look like a really bad idea within this cosmology? So what people do, following this logic, is that they defecate in a different spot every day. And the thing that makes it clean is the fact that it is in the open air. Now you have to understand this logic before we do anything else. We have to understand the software and think of open defecation as an issue of software, not as an issue of hardware. Now that I've given you that definition of the problem, now that you know that it's about culture and it's about the space in between peoples, Nathan is going to tell us the first of the solutions that come from this particular definition of the problem.
Now that you have a good understanding of the problem, I want to tell you about, as said before, one of the solutions. Public health officials are now supporting new approaches to solving this epidemic. Kamal Carr has spent many years focusing on hardware with very little progress and decided that it was time to change tactics and create a demand first before the supply. He traveled to a Bangladeshi village called Mosmoil and took the community around the open defecation sites. He made sure that everyone was together and everyone could see each other's expressions while walking by these piles and piles of feces. He performed a demonstration. He plucked a fly from one of these piles and put it into a solution. The solution dissolved the fly's stomach lining, releasing the contents of the stomach into the solution. He threatened to drink it and asked others if they would like a sip as well. And with their horrified expressions, they realized that this was definitely a problem. And it was not only a health problem, but it was about dignity before one's community. And something had definitely changed. Now it was no longer a taboo issue. It was not an individual thing either. It was a community problem. And they asked him for help, but he said he would not bother with anything similar to the toilet subsidies or ask them to stop open defecation. Many other public advocacy campaigns, but he said he would stay and work to reach a new consensus around the definition of the problem. As he was saying this, a group of children started digging a new latrine for the community. He stayed until the culture, the software of the village changed, and the hardware shortly followed. And the results from this village were extraordinary. If you want to hear more about this, then you can Google Community-Led Total Sanitation, or CLTS, and find out more about Kamal Carr.
And when you do diagnose the issue at the intersubjective level, at the level between people, this actually opens up a whole new range of possible solutions. What we found, and this was a study by Gertius in 2015, is that you would have a much bigger impact as a health professional, not just targeting the individual, but rather thinking about that individual in relationship to their neighborhood. So if you were to get a few of the neighbors to start practicing safe sanitation, what you found that this actually had a much bigger impact than if you went to the individuals and told each one of them to practice safe sanitation. It is the people in their lives that they deem important, and that relationship, it's at that level that you must make your impact as a physician, that you must make your impact as a public health official, because they're far more likely to follow those that are important to them than abstract principles. Now, if we are going to diagnose at the intersubjective level, and if we're going to suggest treatment and solutions at the intersubjective level, at the cultural level, at the group level, this invariably draws health professionals into politics. Now, when you go through med school, and as I've seen my brother go through, and I've seen many friends go through, and now I'm having a look at the syllabus very, very closely, I noticed something really interesting. We pretend you guys can be apolitical. In anthropology, we call this the illusion of the null perspective, as if you looking at this issue has no bearing on that issue, as if there's a position that you take that doesn't have ramifications for the whole group. I sometimes think politics, and that is to say the collective decision-making process, is a bit like negotiation. You don't have a choice as to whether you do it or not. If you don't do it, it has an impact. If you do it, it has an impact. So the question really is, how well are you doing it? And how ethically justifiable is your position? Are you conceding the ground at the causation level that affects the health of your patients? What about that duty of care? Perhaps we need a new perspective on this. We need to realize, just as you're doing right now, you guys have an incredibly important voice. You have a lot of symbolic capital, a lot of legitimacy to speak on these issues. And if you choose to abdicate that space, someone else will fill it. Someone far less qualified, someone far less empirically grounded and ethically justified in their perspectives, and they will put out bad ideas, misdiagnoses, and this will contribute to more issues. Let me give you one particular example. If you're in India, one of the ways you could deal with open defecation is to actually tell folks that it's okay to have the small pits. One of the biggest issues in India, and nearly half the population practices open defecation, is that they want giant latrines, giant holes. They want it so big that it would take 40, 50 years to actually fill it up. Now let's have a look at the level of culture, at the intersubjective level. Why would they want something like this? Why are they not okay with small latrines? Well, you see, small latrines need to be cleaned every year. And for that kind of cleaning, somebody needs to go in there and deal with the feces. In India, given the caste system, that's still the job of the untouchables. Now, as a doctor, you could say that's just a fact of life, we can't get around that culture issue, or you can confront it directly. And can you see that in confronting open defecation, you also simultaneously need to confront the injustices and the inequalities of the caste system? We don't get a choice as to whether we're political or not. The only thing we get a choice is how well we do it and how ethically justified is our position. Now that you have a good idea of the definition of the problem, some of the solutions, I would like to tell you there's some fantastically good news. There's a wonderful organization, the Global Sanitation Fund, and they're at the forefront of this kind of behavioral change implementation, and they're doing wonderful, wonderful work. If you read their latest report, 10 million more people now are practicing safe defecation, whereas before they were openly defecating. 10 million human beings. But there's an issue here. Their funding is about $120 million. $120 million. And as Nathan said, the opportunity cost of not dealing with this issue is $260 billion. So the cost that we're willing to put in for prevention is $120 million, and the opportunity cost of not doing anything is $260 billion. Now this is a wonderful program, and it's something that we can get behind because they've accurately diagnosed the problem and they've got fantastic solutions. And here's your opportunity to use your voice and to give us political capital, so when we do go into the political system, we can go before our elected representatives and say, Nathan and I feel passionate about this issue. All up, if we get this right, we could end open defecation by 2030. And that would mean as much as 1.5 million children wouldn't have to die every year from the preventable diseases. It's one of the cheapest, alongside vaccines, ways of saving lives. That's a cause we can all get behind. But that's a cause that has to be dealt with at the clinical level, at the cultural level, and the political level. And this is an open invitation to you all. We'd love for you to join us. Thank you so much, guys.
As we're heading over to the lounge area, once again, if you have any burning questions for Akram and Nathan, please feel free to send them through now. I'm okay. You're the most polite guest we've had so far. Not to talk the others down, but no one's offered me a glass of water. Thank you very much for that. I think we can all agree that was a fantastic speech. I had a question, and since I run it, I get to ask whatever I want. In terms of your cultural background, Akram, you're obviously born originally from Afghanistan and moved to Australia, and now you're heavily involved in the Indigenous community. Do you seem to identify more with a particular culture? And obviously you enjoy the Aboriginal culture, and what is it about it that appeals to you so much?
That's a really good question, and it's a really big question. I suppose the first part of it is I'm incredibly privileged. Yes, I didn't get a choice as to where I was born, when I was born. If I got a choice of that, I would not have chosen Afghanistan in the middle of a war zone. Nobody ever gets a choice. I would have picked Peppermint Grove. Upper middle class family, yeah, male obviously. You can do, being born male has a lot of advantages, so if I got a choice, I wouldn't be born where I was, I really wouldn't. But because I was born in that place, right in the middle of a war zone where everything was breaking down, it gave me a profound perspective as to what happens when we stop to do things right, when we stop helping things go right, when civic society collapses. So I've always known what happens, right, when civic society collapses. There's a lot of folks in our community who genuinely believe that everything would be okay if we just allowed individuals to have perfect freedom and for us to do whatever we wanted. We're not beholden to anything or anyone. There is that perspective. I've seen that place. It was Kabul, and it was a horrible place. And so from that perspective, I realized how precious these institutions are. And so when I went to Pakistan, when we fled to Pakistan, I had to adapt to a whole other culture. And again, another great place, don't be female, right? And of course, I had no idea about these privileges then. And then I came to Australia. And again, a whole new culture. And I never got a choice. See, I never got a choice in each one of these places. And I realized something at the end of it. And then I got to go to the Kimberley. That's a fourth culture. The more culture you pour into human beings, it's not like the stuff before tips over. Like there's a limit in the, it's not like this glass. If I pour too much water, the stuff before spills over. The more culture you pour into a human being, the bigger the glass gets. I can have 4 identities, right? And be able to draw from 4 very different cultures. One that has existed for 5,000 years, the Afghan, this European heritage, about 200 odd years, and the indigenous heritage, 50,000+ years. How incredibly lucky am I to be able to draw from all that? And what's wonderful about Australia is it's one of the few countries that gives us the freedom to choose how we want to be Australian. It allows us the liberty to be able to exist quite comfortably with the plurality of our identities, be multiple things at once, and still be Australian. That's very, very special. And so when I went to the Kimberley, the groundwork in many ways was set. And I had the first thought I would have nothing in common with these people. Honestly did. And I was a little bit racist too. Now you wouldn't expect that, but I was. And so after a few years, it starts to dawn on me, wait a second, there's something about these people that I recognize. And it was in about the 4th year that I was adopted into an indigenous family, into the Jubwa family in the town of Luma. And my adopted grandfather, he took me out for a chat one day. And he said, Akram, we know a little bit of your story. Let me tell you a little bit of my family story. And he told me this amazing story of how his grandfather was an Afghan cameleer. And at the end of it, he said something like this. It's been 150 years since a cheeky Afghan has snuck into our family. And I just realized how incredibly connected we were. And the best part about being in the Kimberley and really getting to know this culture. Culturally speaking, I'm about 5 years old, so I'm still a baby. The more I learned about this culture, the greater my sense of belonging to Australia. I felt fully Australian, probably on my 3rd year in the Kimberley. It wasn't when I got my citizenship. It wasn't when I had my legal citizenship. It was my 3rd year. And it was because it's really interesting. I think belonging is us being embedded in the world. That's partly true. But the much deeper truth is it's our world being embedded in us and allowing time for that to happen. Which doesn't really happen in our busy life here, but it can happen in a place like Luma.
That's a very good answer. Yeah. Now, for anyone that had the privilege of going to Akram's workshop yesterday, you might know that it went for an extra hour. Unfortunately, we're once again out of time. So just a final message before we thank Akram and Nathan one more time. Anyone with Rego Plus needs to head out of the plenary hall and meet Bidget at the back. And I'd also like to make a special mention of Nathan, who is a Year 10 Scotch student. And I don't know about you, but in Year 10, I still couldn't talk to a girl. I still can't, but let alone 600 medical students. So could you join me in thanking Nathan?